Right. All right. We're live.
Okay, it is 6:01. We're actually going to wait 2 or 3 more minutes for our last member since we are down to a commission of 4. So while we are live, we are waiting till like 6:04. So this is similar to residential exterior paint program. This is similar to our facade improvement because we talked about that too. Taking the facade improvement program and moving it to residential. Because it's so expensive to up, like it is so expensive. My house had lead paint, my first house did. So first I had to mitigate the lead paint and then the paint that had to be put on it to protect everything. Like that little house, which was only like a 25 by like 30-foot house, cost $11,000 to paint.
They have paint that covers lead paint that will keep it down.
Well,
so
no,
you
it's
don't
just
have
like
to,
it's a thicker
scrape it and
paint
stuff.
and you have to use a better quality
Yeah, it's
paint.
like super thick and it's
Yeah.
expensive paint
Sherwin-Williams
too.
But that
does it.
covers it up, so you know you don't have to worry about it.
But
Well,
we still had to do
interior,
some
like,
mitigation.
You had to do it outside though.
Yeah, we still had to do a little,
Oh.
they had to go out and do some scraping and like, you know, smooth things out. But like 11 grand. I painted my 3,600 square foot house in Aurora for like 4. And this was 11. Hey, Mike.
Hey.
Hey, Mike. Hey, Mike. This is fantastic. Shannon, I really like, I want to do something like this.
Yes, I
With
thought
us
of
as
what you
well.
guys said when I saw that.
We've talked about that. We're gonna actually get into that in our work session. That's a new addition from Chief.
A little checklist, yeah. And the plans are the same ones in the packet. They're just printed for ease of viewing.
Okay.
Oh, you have to keep flipping it on, you know, I have a flip line.
I make it big like 8 times.
Yes.
Right.
All right, it is 6:03. We will call to order the April 16th regular meeting of the Historic Preservation Review Commission. If we could I've called to order, if we do a roll call, please.
Sure. Shannon Glazer.
Here.
Patty Tyler. Here. Vice Chair Michael Davenport.
Here.
Chair Lisa Mantle.
Here. And just as a quick aside, we have an opening for a full-time member on the Hprc. So if you're interested, please submit your information to one of our city staff. Okay, I would take a motion to approve the minutes of February 20th, 2024. Give you a chance to look at the minutes.
I actually did.
All right, I move to approve minutes.
Thank you so much, Patty. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Shannon. Any discussion? All right, all in favor, please raise your right hand and say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. All right, let's move on to, do we have any public comments?
Nobody in the room.
Do you have anybody online?
Nope. Nobody online.
Okay, we're gonna close the public comments. Does anyone have a conflict of interest today with our COA that is upcoming?
No.
All right, let's move on to new business, the certificate of appropriateness, review of additions and rehabilitation of the existing building at 1744 Minor Street. Dylan, if you'd like to give us the staff's report.
Sure. So, this is a request for several items, including, additions to the existing structure at 1744 Minor Street, rehabilitation of the existing facade, and installation of roof-mounted solar panels. This building was purchased by the city and is going to be rehabilitated as the city's police department. We reviewed the plans, which are in front of you, and I've just pulled them up on the screen as well. And reviewed the history of the parcel. The structure was not built during the period of significance, and it's not seen to be a contributing structure because it was outside the period of significance, and it doesn't appear to have gained significance historically in its own rights.
It's 1980s beauty.
Yeah.
It is a 19, I mean, if you look at it, it's 1980s.
Yeah, so, yeah, Exactly, so it like maybe is 50 years old, but I don't actually think so. Well, the original structure probably is, but then they did an addition in 82, which, you know. it's a-
There's a gas station there.
Wasn't it a car?
1930s.
Wasn't it in between 1930s and the bank took it, wasn't there a car dealership there too?
Yeah,
I think it did change.
well,
actually.
when we first were talking about this project, the architects pulled up a, what's it called, Ski Racer, the movie, and it has that facade in the background, and that's from
Oh,
like. the
downhill
60s.
racer?
Downhill racer, and it's like shown just very briefly, but it has like a white facade, and it looks like, yeah, an auto garage or repair shop or something like that. But clearly it's been rehabilitated since then, and then became a bank.
Chinese food, Szechuan food was there.
Oh, we have
It's
Chinese,
there, so
okay.
it's had a lot of iteration.
Yeah, sounds good.
So of course, this is a COA, and there's a number of criteria that we review it against. The key thing, given that this is a non-contributing structure, is reviewing it against part 3 of the historic design guidelines for new construction and rehabilitation, restoration, or renovation of non-contributing structures. And this review really has been how it impacts the rest of the historic district rather than the building itself, which is, you know, non-historic, I suppose, in its current iteration. So staff finds that the proposed work will not adversely materially affect the building's historic quality. Again, currently, there's not an extreme amount of historical significance to the building structurally. And then when comparing it against, and just to note there, similar colors proposed and no height is proposed to be added to the building.
So the roof line will stay the same.
Right, the
Okay.
big change,
So it won't get any taller.
right, no taller, the big change really, like if you look at the,
This one?
like if you look, so that would be, yeah, the as proposed. And so you can kind of see when looking at, say, sheet A 1.0 or A 1.1, which I think is that one, that's A 2.0.
No, I'm in the 5s, hold on.
So I think it's like page 2 and 3, you can kind of see the change in footprint. And you can see existing, there's a few like cutouts on the right-hand side. Right now, those are like open air
Oh, so like, yeah,
awnings
you can
that
see
get
that.
enclosed. And then right now on the west side, there's like a overhanging drive-through
Drive-through.
from when it was a bank, and that'll be enclosed. And so that is the major changes, is filling in those areas. There is a small addition to the footprint on the west side and a little bit there. But you can see, you know, like this, but there is a roof line here already, so they're just kind of sort of building up to the roof line, but filling in that area as well in the
And then right
south
here.
and east, and then on the west slightly. So there's you know, of course, an increase in footprint, but the vast majority of those increases in footprint do already have roof lines, whether it's the you know, the drive-through. And so in that respect, while obviously now you can't see through the drive-through, that kind of already exists area at this point. And there's no proposed change in height. The big change vertically, I suppose, would be solar on top of the existing drive-through, which is, you know, when you look at an elevation drawing, that is kind of the lowest roof line on the building. And so the proposed solar will be lower than the peak of the building, fairly substantial.
Like right here.
Right, and that'll be the only location of solar.
So it's not going on any of this, just right here.
As proposed currently, that's correct.
Is this gonna be enough to make a substantial difference? Did they find that putting this on New Sally Port will be enough for a substantial contribution, thank you, to energy?
That's what I understand. There's a lot
It's a lot of
of
solar
things
panels.
as far as energy efficiency that are gonna have to happen as well.
Okay,
So, yeah, as I mentioned, the current square footage is about 2,500 square feet. The proposed additions totaling will enclose approximately 1,050 additional square feet. So it's an increase in enclosed floor area, but that increase does not, sort of as I've discussed, doesn't seem like it will have an adverse material effect on the historic district as a whole. Nor will it impact adjacent historic buildings, which really is a residential structure and then city hall.
So I have
and bridge.
Oh, I have a question with the Sally Port. It looks like it's far enough away. Have we figured out, like, have we done a site study or has the city done a site study about that wall with the train mural? Because I know the last time we talked about this, I don't know if it was the city council or not, but that train mural is something that was, an interest was expressed in keeping that intact if we could, given that there was, it wasn't city council. We weren't sure about the stability of that wall.
Let's see. I'm
And does that wall belong to this property, or does it belong to the property, the residential property behind it?
well, I believe the wall
I'm not trying to throw a kink
per
in your works.
like if you look at the site plan, which I think is page 2, I believe that wall is sort of just against the property line. And so it looks like a portion of it is likely on this property and a portion may be on the
So, like-
residential property to the west.
Cause it's right, it's all along here.
Right. I don't know, Chief, if you know if that's being preserved.
So in discussions with the architect team, the engineers, I know they want to do everything possible to just completely stay away from that wall.
Okay,
They don't want anything to do with that wall. I know that I was under the impression, based on the surveys, that it wasn't the city's wall, that it was the property owner.
okay,
And like I said, that's why they said they want to stay completely away from anything to do with that. They would talked about actually taking very thorough pictures and documentation of the way the wall stands and exists as of before construction.
which is probably a very wise idea, regardless of whose wall it is.
Correct. But that's what I understand.
Okay.
There's nothing as part of this plan to alter or
Okay.
to try to do anything with that wall.
And there is no current proposal to move like the existing roof line closer to that wall. We're using the existing roof line of that overhang and closing around.
In fact, there's
into
the plan shows that driveway that's on the furthest west. We want to keep that open so that vehicles can still move.
Yeah,
through
I see that
area.
in one of your,
So that would be why the wall which should and not be a part of any of the construction.
yeah, it's 2.0.
That kind of ghostly car there, that's just kind of, that wouldn't be, it would just be like a road.
Well, a road and like the ability to park or throughway.
Oh, I see, okay.
I think the point to that was just to show visually the space itself, not to have a car there, but just to show that a car or vehicle could pass through that
Okay.
space.
Well, it's
For
nice
scale,
having that
yeah.
throughway like from, Colorado over to Minor.
Yes.
So. Yes, in that report, there's request that it charging compliance. Commission shall consider the effect upon the general historic and architectural character of the structure. Given that this will have rehabilitation of the existing facade, it will improve the exterior. The similar colors are proposed to be used, similar architectural style, arrangement, texture, and materials compatible with the district. Proposed exterior work appears to be compatible, the existing scale and architecture doesn't seem to detract from adjacent properties. They're also proposing materials found throughout the district, wood or wood-like material, glass et cetera, that appears to match existing architecture as well as other kind of general. Obviously, it looks like a much newer building because the facade certainly is, but it doesn't seem like it takes away from the historic district as a whole.
And this is on 5.0, you can see the idea of what the solar panels could look like, so. A little bit of an elevation change, but nothing, I don't think anything too extreme.
I would say that the most substantial would be the closing of the
Sally Port.
Sally Port on the north elevation, or on the, I guess it would be the east elevation. You know, where they're proposing the new entry, that's not an incredibly substantial change that's proposed, even though they're closing kind of that front area to create more of a larger entry. So I suppose with all of that, I'll just not dive too much deeper into it and state that staff supports the request and recommends approval of exterior improvements for roof mounted solar, additions to the building totaling approximately 1,050 square feet, and minor exterior rehabilitation work to the existing structure. And of course, Chief Busick is here, who's heading up the effort, you know, since it is the police station. So either of us are happy to answer more questions.
What's a Sally Port?
So it's where the current drive-through is.
Right, and
And
it looks like a
the-
garage, is that?
Right, it is. It's basically a garage, so it's gonna serve a number of purposes. The first purpose would be if we have a vehicle that we need to apply for a search warrant, we have a secure place to put it versus putting it at so-and-so's tow lot. So then it's secure and locked. That's the first thing. The second thing is, with this plan, we have an intention of getting a breathalyzer machine. So currently we have to drive to Georgetown when we process a DUI. If it's a first time offender and a cooperative, we typically will release them to a sober party. So we're driving down to 14 miles to Georgetown to use their machine, to then release them to a sober party in Georgetown to drive back versus having that machine and that ability to do that here in Idaho Springs. I've already contacted the state about that.
Oh, I
Those
see.
machines are free, meaning we don't have to pay for it. It's a state funded piece of equipment.
Right.
And we just have to send a couple of our people to more advanced training to what do you call it? They have to check. Calibrate every month. They have to calibrate it. So that's one of our intentions. And that's another reason to have a Sally Port, to bring people in to securely process them through that. We're also looking at getting a fingerprint machine. We currently use ink, which is really old and typically hasn't been.
Oh, a
used.
digital machine?
Yes.
Oh, excellent.
So one of our responsibilities as a city here in Colorado is that we have to manage our sex offender list, which we do have a number of sex offenders that live in our community, and then we have to fingerprint them. And so we currently use a roller with ink, and that's really very, very, very outdated as far as that process. So that would be part of why you have a Sally Port, to process people and potentially to temporarily hold. There'll be a temporary holding area secure. Now, it wouldn't be a jail because we're not a jail, but that would be part of the reason to have that.
So would it have separate rooms if you needed, say you had two people?
So you got a toilet.
This is a
room.
Sally Port.
But they
So
come
it's
into
basically
these.
an entrance
Yeah.
without going through the front door.
That's true.
And you can put a vehicle in there if it needs to be searched.
True.
I was just
Or any
curious,
of the
why do they
large-
call it a Sally Port?
It's a garage.
Sally Forth?
I know, but, so why do they call it a
I don't
Sally
know why
Port?
they call it.
Okay, I was just curious. Thank you.
I do like this setup, because I remember talking about this with you at some other meeting, how you wanted to be able to process people at the edge of the building rather than bring them all the way through the building. You
Sure.
know, well, it's privacy concerns, you know, someone charged is not someone convicted.
Sure.
So is that your report, Dylan?
I think so, yes.
Okay, I will open this to discussion from the commission. questions, concerns?
I think it was a good staff report. I think the architect has done a good job. And I think it's actually made it slightly more compatible by basically squaring off all those
I agree.
areas underneath the existing roof. It actually is slightly more because the shape is more
Standard.
representative of what was historic.
Yeah,
And I think it was just a good job keeping everything underneath the existing roof. I think it's also mentioned that in the staff report, but I think it's good that this is a reuse of an existing building and it's in the downtown area. And I think those are, from a city planning standpoint, those are both good things that
Well,
are
one-
occurring.
one thing that we talked about, and I think all of you saw this at the Saving Places this year. Reuse buildings are so much smaller than if you build a new building. Like, I'm glad to see that we're able to reuse this. I will say, I know the solar is one of our things. I personally don't have any problem with the solar. Like, the more green energy or renewable energy that we can use, the happier I am. What other concerns do you all have? Oh, did everyone see this? Chief brought this in today. This is a checklist that will be added to the packet of new things that the police station will be providing to the public. ADA compliant, there's a lobby, a public restroom with fountains, a private interview room, a training room. Like, there's a lot of things. If you look at what the current police station has, anybody watching can see this in the updated packet. We only have like 10 of the things on this list. So for a modern police station, I think it's important that we have all of these things, even though that's not really our scope. Anybody else? Although also, thank you for the addition of all the historic buildings. I don't know if you guys saw on the report. I thought we had 46 historic buildings. And if you look, because it lists the historic buildings after all of the police plans, we actually have 60. Oh, there's actually 60 buildings on there
That's within the district?
that are within the district. Like, it lists all of them. And I was like, oh, I'm like off by 14, so.
Yeah, I thought that was quite interesting to include because, well, our ordinance that rezoned all the properties was kind of not, it didn't fully, I think, capture what all was on the nomination form as clearly as maybe it could have, so there was some
Oh, this
question
thing
initially.
is super vague,
Yeah,
super vague.
but there was a question initially on, well, was it even originally meant to be in the historic district, or did we just zone it to the historic district when we did zoning a few years back? But clearly it is on the list here as part of that nomination.
But just non-contributing.
Right. So this is certainly comprehensive, yeah. Yes.
Well, with the creek, it's a logical boundary point to include it in the district.
Yeah, absolutely, though it does seem as though that rock shop directly across the street from it is not included, at
It's
least.
the
zoned.
1930s though. If you see pictures of the train, because the train used to come right there,
Mhm.
pre-1930, I don't know, 35 or something, that rock shop was not there. So that building was built during like, I call it the national park era, when you started to see a lot of the log homes and the log and the rock, because that's what you were seeing in the big lodges in the newly formed national parks.
Mhm.
And that's one, that was one that we talked about in relation to the dining hall at the Club Hotel.
Right.
Because they were both constructed around the same time. But if you see early train pictures, the train stops right there, but that shop is not there.
Hmm.
So it's about 100 years old, almost 100 years old, but it's not in our period of significance.
And one of the things that this building, the police, what will be the new police building, it is done in somewhat of a compatible style because it's sort of a modern interpretation of mining.
Yes,
With the tower being sort of like a head frame. So it's an appropriate design to be surrounding the district.
modern mountain alpine, that's what I call it. At least that's what it looks like. Any other questions or concerns? Any questions for Chief or Dylan? Can't think of any more.
I did think of one other thing as far as the garage use, Patty, and I just wanted to share it. Sometimes we end up with situations, where we have a lot of evidence that we end up collecting. We had one about a year ago at a house with a bunch of stolen things from one of the big box stores up the hill. And so that would also give us the ability to just drive that right in there and then take it right into where the evidence processing area is. It's right near there. So the way that we worked with the architect was to try to create efficiencies of operation as well, versus having to like carry boxes twice as far or upstairs or downstairs, which there aren't stairs in this building, but that's my point, is trying to create operational efficiencies.
Well, and it
So-
looks like a good flow too. So it makes sense flow.
Right,
And it seems like all of the additions are done in such a way that kind of maximize the space, like the existing footprint. Without these additions, really wouldn't do full justice to what a fully functional police station could be.
How long do you see this serving this purpose?
that's a really good question, sir. We've looked at this and we tried to forecast 30 years. We looked at the growth, the population growth of this community, and due to the lack of, I guess, flat land and space to actually have some sort of significant population growth outside of like the development, a little bigger field and whatnot, we feel comfortable that we can get to the 25 to 30 year mark. But part of I think the benefit of the location itself too, when we first were looking at purchasing this, was the architects also identified potential growth areas if we did need to grow as a department long after I'm gone, and all of us are probably gone in positions, which would be the northeast. So it's because it's a big lot. So there'd be potential to do an addition to the northeast, on the northeast of the building, then also potentially on the west side, really and continue and move the west side and grow. So I think keeping that in mind, I think you're looking at 50 years because there's potential because of the size of the lot. The size of the lot is considerable for what you find here in Idaho Springs.
Long-term, more building and less asphalt is probably the thing.
That may be the case down the road, again, long after my tenure.
And what's the schedule as far as proceeding with the project?
So what we did was, we have applied for a grant through DOLA. And as part of that grant and the overall design process, we'd like to create energy efficiency. So one of the things is we already talked to a group, an engineering firm called Group 14, who works with all kinds of government facilities about creating energy efficiency. So, but we have applied for $1 million grant, and we will have an answer to that in mid-July. So until that happens, it sort of pencils down. And if that were to be approved, then we could move aggressively to actually starting construction before the end of this year. And so realistically, because of the amount of renovation, I wouldn't think that we would be in there in 2025, but likely in the spring of 2026.
Okay.
That's what I would forecast.
And the certificate of approval is for 1 year. Would you see getting a building permit before the end of a year from now?
I think that's the intention, because we would have to have the building permit if we were going to start construction before the end of the year. So that's my understanding. This is now my experience is in law enforcement. So construction and all of these things, I'm learning throughout this process.
Well, our COAs used to be 6 months and we extended them to a year, given a lot of the things that we've seen since 2020.
Sure.
So I think part of what your question is, you're gonna have to come back and see us.
Well, maybe not. If they get the building permit, they won't, but it's something for us as a board, I think, to think about considering to be able to consider extensions for reasonable cause, as opposed to having to go through a hearing again.
I would like the,
Not for now, but I'm just saying.
oh, no, no,
As we look at
it's-
the regulations, I think it's something worth thinking about.
it is. It would have to, it would still have to be a show up and like talk to us kind of hearing. I don't like a blanket, "Oh, yeah, here's an extension. That's a good point though.
One other thing, just to touch on that, the architect and engineering team of people believe that we're around the 20% sort of design through design. So I think with that, I think we feel like we would likely, if approved in July and then things ramp up again, we would be in a position to potentially apply for building permits. So
Okay.
maybe that's optimistic on my part, but I think we feel good about, there's been a lot of work put into this already. So
But it's just with the nature of construction, you never know when delays are gonna happen.
that's true.
Kind of off topic, because I usually don't talk at these things, but does a permit also include a demolition permit? So when the COA is issued and we have to get a permit within a year, does the demo permit count as said permit?
Oh,
That's something we probably should look at. I mean, people
Oh,
usually
no.
think it means the building permit. But it's normally once you get a permit from the building official, that's supposed to take over from the COA other than complying with the COA.
So for us, a demo permit is a building permit. It's one
Right.
and the same for at least staff. So I'm not sure if that's how
do they apply for a demo permit and then a building permit, or is the demo part of the building permit?
usually separate.
You could do it either way, I guess.
Sometimes
right?
it's combined,
If you
it's
do
usually
your
separate.
demolition building.
Right.
Because you have a distinct demo plan as well. I don't know, that's a good,
It's something to look into. It's something for us as a board to look into
yeah,
this year as we look at the regulations.
Because then even before design was 100%, there's still opportunity to get the demo permit to start rolling. And that would count to keep the COA active and not expire.
no, it's a good point, okay, that's a note for us. Any other questions? Shannon, Mike? Okay, then I will close our discussion. And we have a request for a motion to approve the COA. And there is the appropriate verbiage down at the very bottom of the staff report. Take a motion.
Is that the planning staff recommendation?
So I would recommend the Historic Preservation Review Commission start there. So we're very specific. All right, I'll make the motion. I move that we approve the certificate of appropriateness for exterior improvements to 1744 Minor Street for 1 roof-mounted solar panels, 2 additions to the building totaling approximately 1,050 square feet, and 3 minor exterior rehabilitation work to the existing structure. I have a second.
Second.
All right, any other discussion? All right, all in favor, please raise your right hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Great, the COA is approved. You all are, signed and sealed and legal here, at least on our end.
Okay, thank you.
And just moving along in our, what we have in our packet, if you look at the end of the minutes, all of our terms are listed. So, let's see, Mike, Shannon, and Patty are all through 2026. And we do, because Rachel has just resigned, we are looking for a new person, so if you know someone, encourage them. Are we looking at meetings in May?
I don't have anything right now that will be coming through COA. So if we did have a meeting, it would likely be a work session.
Okay, I just like to give everybody a heads up as we move, like in that first kind of summer month. Then I will adjourn our meeting at 6:35 so that we can move into our work session. Meeting adjourned. We need a quick comfort break.
Bye, everyone. Have a nice work session.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
Wonder. Thanks, Chief. Thanks for fielding all the questions.
Oh, no problem.
Especially that Sally Port thing.
Actually, I like the name of that. I think that's a
I
fun
do too, I
name.
just wanna know where it comes, can you
Now
research
makes
where
me
it
want
came
to-
from?
I'm gonna Google that, find out.
Can you text me the
I
answer?
looked it up on Wikipedia, it says port comes from the Latin porta for door, and Sally is derived from Latin for salire, which is to jump, which is a sort of military maneuver through, while making a siege, I guess, so they kind of sneak through the jump passage. Historically.
So it's a jumping door room.
I'm calling it a garage.
No, it must stay the Sally Port.
So instead of having to open your main door of your port, for example, you can go out of
The
this.
Sally Port.
Yes, so then you can sneak in.
I just heard that term before, that's all. All right.
Well, I knew that nobody knew what that meant, so I'm the one that always asks that question.
I know, you're the one.
I am.
Thanks, Chief. Thanks,
Alright.
Wonder.
Thank
you.
Hey, Wonder, thanks for printing off the plans. We
Yeah,
always
sure, thing,
appreciate
makes it
that.
easier to read, for sure. Oh,
Yeah, I
Yes.
do have one
Okay,
thing
bye.
before I forget. This is
Bye.
the certificate for, River Sound.
Oh, you and I have to sign this. Okay.
Yes,
New 6-foot door, second story residential addition, roof, okay. Following stipulations. Usually let's talk the short on. Can I try one?
Sure.
Store with accurate materials. Accurate materials. Thanks, you. Dylan. Michael, I'm gonna have you take a quick look at this. This looks like what we did. I wanna
And it
make
should,
sure.
and it should be in the minutes, or it is in the minutes.
Yeah, that's in the minutes.
This is for the Opera House,
Mhm.
I'm guessing.
Yes.
Let me look. So this is their lavender oat chill, but I got it with 2% milk, because I don't like
John and
milk.
Andy are on
And then it's got,
remotely, so I think for this work session. if
pomegranate
anything,
in it.
Oh, the freeze-dried berry things.
Yeah, and then I
Okay.
have them put the cold brew. You know, creamy
that
stuff on,
foam.
yeah, foam, cold brew foam on top.
I think it's the same, Michael.
You do it like pen.
Oh, wrong pen. That was your, I was thinking that was a,
A writing piece?
yeah, no, I like somebody else to look at these before I sign it.
Oh, yeah.
And then, of course, they will still need to get building permits and all that, and as one of these stipulations suggests, we'll need to review that as well to make sure.
And
they
our
still
materials. Okay,
comply.
thank you.
Have we heard anything about, did they submit their grant, did both projects submit their grant applications?
I
Oh, I believe they did.
believe they did. I know the Hot Springs did. I had not heard from Julie or Carla about the Opera House building, but to confirm, I suppose, but they had said that everything was prepared to do so. I believe also the senior center may have submitted a grant.
They did. And they got it.
Oh, okay, for their second story
Yeah.
patio.
And I want, hold that thought because I want, I don't know if you guys read that in the report. You were there, but you were there for part of it, you weren't there. I was trying to be as thorough as I could about the stuff that we discussed. Oh, let's go ahead and call our work session our work session is open at 6:40 PM. If you look at the report that I did for our tour,
And I pulled it up on the screen, so
yeah,
it's in the recording, but I don't have any paper copies, I don't think so, but it's in the packet.
we talked a lot, about, and I do think that we probably moved a little away from our scope. But we looked at, and where some of this came from, I will tell you just for myself, because I had a discussion with Chuck, with the mayor. And he said, we have all these assets. And what are these assets doing for our residents? How are they improving, bettering, enriching our residents' lives? And we're gonna get to like discussing our policies as well, because that also came up, like, Mike asked if we could talk about reviewing, like, what's a process that we can put into place for reviewing our guidelines, our design guidelines, you know, the Idaho Springs design guidelines, and maybe some of our building code, but that might not be ours, that might be planning commission. But for us, like, how do we revise and update our guidelines so that maybe our shalls, our shoulds, you know, or ought to can be a must if it is necessary to help preserve, you know, our historic district. But one of the things that we talked about was we have a lot of these city assets, and many of them, I'd say predominance of them are historic, but we still, the city owns a lot. So the question becomes, what is the city doing to make this available to the public? Like, is there a discussion to be had, because we're moving into sites and facilities, that, if you guys are interested, the ordinance, is it first reading?
First reading.
First reading of the ordinance is gonna be April 29th to create a sites and facilities commission. It'll be just like this commission. We're gonna operate under the same umbrella, our historic preservation umbrella. But sites and facilities will be concerned with monitoring, like they go out and do that tour every year. They check to see what's falling apart. And if something does fall apart and we have to do emergency repair, you know, how do we handle emergency repair stabilization? And how do we do it in a way that with an eye towards historic preservation? I'll get to that. So when we were going through this tour, I went through all of the areas that we went and looked at, like we looked at the 6th Street hose house. The moisture barrier issue is still a concern. You know, there was, go ahead, Mike.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Just some ideas on how to handle the moisture barrier. And one of the suggestions was, could this be a community meeting space? Because they would like to put the stove back in there. There's a lot of like carvings and writings on that one window that I know the fire chief, assistant fire chief has expressed, hey, I'd hate to see that go away, and we don't want that to go away. Because that's like a piece of living history for the fire brigades that were there. But like using that as a meeting place, you know, same thing that you do with the reservoir, you have to come and do a deposit, show us your license, not quite sign your life away, but partly get the key, and then you go turn it in and get your stuff back.
Did anything come up about the hinges being on the outside?
No, but that's actually a really good thing. The hinges are, if you guys are, I don't think you saw it, Patty, but Shannon was there. The hinges are on the outside. And when we went to the Bryant hose house, the hinges are on the inside. Like, so those hinges probably need to be redone.
Yeah, regardless of how it happens, it should be done because it would take 5 minutes for someone to take the doors off.
And then our beautiful historic stove would be out the window, out the door.
Literally.
So if we can put that on our list, and we probably will have to talk to Tim and Chris.
Right, because the work on that is still not complete, right? So that would be a good opportunity to do that before we.
What's not complete?
Just the host house in general because of the
Moisture
issue and all of that. So if we're revisiting that.
And look at the plans, because maybe the plans actually showed the hinges on the inside rather than the outside.
I don't remember, like, our big discussion was over the man door.
And a lot of time, the drawings we see are not at that level of detail yet.
Mhm.
But it would seem like a relatively simple fix that would increase the security of the building. Though I suppose in the future this discussion on that sort of thing would probably be sites and facilities to start, is the intent.
Well, I think the idea with sites and facilities too is that they are our first, you know, they are they're the city's prominent arm for maintaining those specific facilities, you know, down to the details like the hinges.
Right, and so it would start with them to make the recommendation and expertise and all of that, and then come to Hprc for DOA and all of that.
Well, because they're still actively involved in the work though, we shouldn't have to do another COA for the hose house.
Right.
God, I hope not. That's a long process. One of the other things we talked about, that tower in the back of the hose house is actually one of the first telegraph signal towers. And it's just sitting there and it's wibbly wobbly, like if you lean on it, it sways. So that may be something like as we move into sites and facilities, that we recommend or put on the to-do list of how do we preserve that tower, because the tower was not part of the Hose House preservation plans. And it's there, and it's been there for a long time. I would hate to take it away, particularly because it has a history as one of our first signal towers in the county. The other part of that particular house is that, and this is something that we saw it over here when we walked over to the Blue Ribbon Tunnels, is that we have a couple places where there are questions about property lines from private property and city property. And so that's one of the things that we have got to address. Because I would have guessed adverse possession like comes into play with city property too. So we need to we should be able to walk on city property without the private property owners who are adjacent giving you the stink eye or want to know what you're doing. Like, that is not a good environment.
Right, and I mean, the Blue Ribbon Tunnels are one that I think you likely cannot access without either crossing the creek or crossing private property, which is not
Ideal.
certainly ideal for maintenance. Suppose, theoretically, the other way to access would be go all the way around from the bridge on the opposite, sort of on 103, which would be quite a difficult.
You would think you have to come all the way
walk
along
access
the creek. Just with that, we talked about for Mike and Patty, we talked about actually, because we own Waterwheel Park is not is an underutilized park for Idaho Springs. You know, we don't have a lot of park space. That's actually a pretty prominent park and easily accessed, but it's not well utilized. So this goes back to, we need more wayposts, more guideposts, more signage. I don't know where I was, but wherever I was, it was a historic town, and they had along the light posts, the small signs that told people where they could go to look. And I think that's something that we need here.
And that could be a grant application to the state to do signage. That's something that quite a few towns and places, for example, plaques are very common. That towns will ask for a grant to do plaques. Doesn't have to be plaques, but and that's a relatively small grant. So it may not be a competitive grant, possibly. It might be much easier to obtain because you're not competing with other big projects or something like that.
Well, I like the idea of us having better wayposting. Dylan suggested if the city could become involved in sponsoring geocaching, which is another way to have people utilizing and seeing some of our spots. But anyway, with Waterwheel Park, one of the things we talked about, Shannon and Dylan and John and I, as we were standing in knee-deep snow over by the first
adventure.
That was an adventure through the Blue Ribbon Tunnel. Dylan was in his cowboy boots. Is there a way to go from Waterwheel Park and do a little bridge to a landing over on the opposite side that the city owns near Blue Ribbon Tunnel? This is obviously, a little larger of a
We
project.
have to watch out for the raptors for that.
So that'd be
so
a
they
big
wouldn't get
project because
snagged.
it has to be a certain height, so the rats can go under.
And something like that might be a trail grant
Mm.
through Colorado Open Space.
But also that goes along with, is there a better way to do that gas line? Because the gas line creates problems too.
It does at high water.
At high water. Is there a way to do those things all in one fell swoop? I don't know. So I would like it if you guys would definitely read just what we talked about, because I feel like if we want to look at our historic assets as part of a living piece of the city, we have to look at them as different. I think, you guys can disagree with me. We have to look at them as something more than just an asset that is sitting on a shelf or it's listed on a piece of paper. How do we make these more active, engaged, involved assets? Like the Powder House is there a way we can do a park? There is somebody that lives back there that's private property, so we would have to work with them. But that property here's the Powder House sitting right next to the creek, and there's space on either side of the Powder House for some picnic tables, a picnicking area, but then up, here's the powerhouse, the city actually owns up this way, it's like 19 acres. So, what kind of trails or playgrounds or park space could we, I mean, nobody's gonna build on that. The city, as far as we knew, we discussed, had no plans for that,
Right.
And in addition to for the city residents, there's also a benefit from the standpoint of tourists. I mean, a lot of people come and stop just to eat here. But if there are things that could be easily identified, then here's something you can see, go see in 5 minutes. To just keep them here a little longer.
Well, and that goes to, we talked about this, like a walking tour or a tour where we put together a site of our city assets. Is it geocaching? Is it a tour? Is it a historically narrated tour? That is to be decided, but how do we put together in one place a piece that people can access through a QR code or whatever, so they can learn about our sites and go visit them?
Just like an app through your phone or something.
Yeah.
Get the info that way.
Well, and I'm sure there are, John has mentioned grants for that kind of like informational, educational programming sort of thing.
And that's a separate category in the state grants for educational purposes.
Right, so it would seem, I'm not that tech savvy with respect to creating an app or anything, where you could like hit a button and it talks to you and kind of directs you to each site on like a something like that, but certainly something more static, like if you even just created a map that kind of showed an easy walking path between all our.
Or just a map, and here's a
historic-
dot, and you press the dot, and it takes you to.
Yeah, it could be a very simple
Yeah.
brochure.
And then
that would
maybe
show all the
pops up
locations.
like a bubble,
Mhm.
historically
Yes.
relevant information, and more ways to find more info and stuff like that. And yeah, you can see, it's kind of an interesting parcels. I pulled up on the screen a clear map of, so this is Powder House, so like, it's kind of this strange city property that runs along this, but then
Oh,
all
wow.
of this,
All the
It's
money
Forest
claims
Service.
are.
Oh, that's all Forest Service?
yeah,
Wow.
so you can see like, if, that kind of a big takeaway from that tour we took was that there's a lot of our spaces that there's a facility on it, but then there's a lot of stuff
So
around
where's
it that could be.
Do you have to cross National Forest to get to Powder House?
No,
No, because so the Powder House is like approximately right where my cursor is.
Uh-huh.
And so you come in on a Soda Creek Road, turn right on the Little Bear, and then there's a big parking area right in here.
Uh-huh.
And Powder House is just right
Right
there.
there,
So
like-
essentially, that kind of non-shaded area is all city, and then all the yellow is
Forest Service.
Forest Service. So there's quite a lot of public land there. That could be, utilized in some way or another. And it's kind of similar with the hose house, the 6th Street hose house, is there is land around it that currently just kind of sits.
Well, we talked about at the hose house, Patty, because the rest of us were there, at the 6th Street hose house. Can we make that community gardens, which means we would have to have water. So, we'd have to access water onto that property. Somebody said, would you put a porta potty there? I was like, I don't know if we need a pit toilet.
Well, but right across the street is that little park, that's.
So then, no, I don't want to, I don't want to get involved in, sewage maintenance of any sort, if we can avoid it, but, water would be, and do an allotment, like for city residents, I'm thinking about like if you're in England, people get allotments in their villages, and sometimes it's really long, maybe we do an allotment and you get an allotment for like 2 years.
Or maybe we talk to,
Grab some soil.
yeah,
Who
and
does
see if they would want to manage that also.
They charge for that though. I wouldn't want to charge for this for city residents.
I did see, or I did talk to, Uchi from.
Planning and scraps.
Scraps of Soil, who said that, this was kind of right when I first started, but she was interested in, more opportunities to do things, and so.
Well, there's always a waiting list for those, like,
Right.
always.
Yeah,
Yeah, because they just sent out a Facebook post, it's time to sign up if you want one. But what do they charge?
I think it's $75 for the summer.
horrible.
But if we look at the median income in this city, and I look at things like, what can we offer to people that you get because you're a resident here? You can go to the reservoir. Is it even a $10 fee anymore?
It's actually $100 deposit.
Yeah, it's like a cash deposit, right?
cash
But you get your
deposit,
it's because you can't steal the key.
and you get your deposit back when you bring the key back.
So you put a deposit down and you get the deposit back. You know, if you leave your allotment in, I just feel like there have to be other ways other than just you plunk down money and you never get it back, like. These need to be city, I don't know, I feel like these are city assets,
Well,
the public is already paying for them.
the reason I say that is because you kind of need somebody to manage it.
Ah, why Miss Patty, you're bringing me to something else we discussed. I know, I'm sorry. Sorry. Oh, just so you guys know, the visitor center, we did in city council, the visitor center, the ADA ramp and the stairs are being repaired. And there's a huge challenge because if we had to redo that ramp and rebuild it, the new regulations would make it very difficult and much more expensive, and we have to move a lot of the mining equipment that's along that, you know, that walkway and that sidewalk and parking lot area, and that equipment is not small. So they found a gentleman, Mr. Wallace, Scott Wallace, who will be repairing that. That will be done like by the end. When is he starting that? We just wrote him a check, so should be soon.
It should be very soon.
Because he's
Not
buying the
sure.
materials. Something just to think about, and I would love your thoughts on this, and this is gonna require a conversation with the Historical Society, but the Underhill Museum is owned by the Historical Society. And eventually the Bryant Castle will be owned by the Historical Society. So they may be, that might be worth a partnership to help them maintain that, because those are both pretty significant. Like, I don't know if you guys have toured the Underhill. It's a fascinating building as far as what you see structurally in Idaho Springs and the way that it was built and mindset. And the castle, I mean, you know, the castle is the castle. It's amazing. So
Have you been in the castle?
No, I would love to go.
It's like, here was the main castle, and then we built this section, and then we built a section over here, and then we built a section over here, and then we built one that joined these two together. It's very, very interesting.
it's a very cool building. The gentleman who is the caretaker is doing a really amazing job. Like, he is really doing what Charlie, yeah, he's doing what he needs to do to, you know, there's love. There is love in what he does.
Now, there is going to be money to maintain that when the
Yes.
Historic Society gets it.
But that money was gifted when Bill passed. So Charlie is using some of that too.
Right.
So this,
but
we don't know
there's-
how much money. They don't know how much money.
It was a lot.
It was, but what is that thing costing to maintain right now? You know, so.
That's Charlie.
So that's an idea. The Bryant Hose House is actually in pretty good shape. We thought about, like, could that be a tool library? Like, you know how the library does a library of things? Could the city manage a tool library of things for people that need tools but don't wanna, or can't afford to? We went and looked at the train depot. It's actually really cool. It does not have all the gingerbread. I was thinking for some reason that it still had the gingerbread. It does not. If you look at the old pictures where it had all that gingerbread on the two ends of it. But Jonathan seemed to think that that could be, if that comes back, and I don't know if you guys know that, like, there has been discussion that
The
train
depot up
depot,
on 103?
yeah, might come back as part of the mobility hub. Huh, interesting. Oh, you heard something different? No? Oh.
And there's a book that actually has very good drawings of what it used to look like, on 3 sides. The 4th side is not as easy to see drawing, but there was a book that was done over the course of several decades where someone had come up here and just drawn things before, while the railroad was still here.
Is that Muriel Wool?
No, this is the one by the guy who built the railroad layout that's up in Cheyenne.
Okay,
In the, it basically was golden to silver plume is the model railroad that was done. And there's 2 volumes, and there's just a tremendous number of sketches that he drew to do before he built his model
what's the name of the
railroad.
book?
I can get that for you. It's something like Up the Creek.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
There's a volume 1 and a volume 2, and most of the Idaho Springs stuff is in volume 1.
So the train depot, because it is privately owned, that is something that is a longer term, but I have heard mention of it perhaps coming back by the time we get the mobility hub going. I don't know. It's a possibility. It would be fabulous if we could.
I live across the street from that.
It's a cool building. We didn't go visit it, but the Steve Canyon statue, that is a city-owned asset. Where is the Steve Canyon statue right now?
The park across where we're at.
Oh, it's right over here.
CRC.
CRC.
CRC,
It's
it's in
like
that
right next to
corner.
the
Is that where it's
23rd
living?
Avenue
Is that where we're
Bridge.
going to let it live forever? Because
Well,
it used to be over here.
it's been there at least since I moved in November 2020.
So
Oh, is
they
there-
moved it when they tore down,
K-goat.
yeah,
And when they
because it was
redid
in
that
front of
whole
K-goat.
corner there, what was like 7 years ago, even longer?
It might be a little bit longer, because it was like almost right when I moved up here.
John wrote a note saying Steve Canyon statue is in need of repair AS.
Okay, so he needs to be on our sites and facilities, and it's,
What
while he
kind of
is,
repair?
well, Jonathan, what kind of repair? He's listening, so.
He has cracks in his face.
These cracks in
I
his
haven't noticed that. I walk by that like every day.
Yeah, I've noticed that the detail maybe has eroded slightly.
Is he concrete? Made out of concrete?
I'm not,
I think so. I don't, it doesn't seem
So,
like
yeah.
chip stone or anything.
Yeah.
I
Is he
thought-
concrete, Jonathan?
I think John wrote yes, but
Okay, so then Steve Cannon needs to go on to our like sites and facilities, because a lot of the things like the powder house,
John has info and he says it's fixable.
okay, the powder house, the visitor center, central hose house, and what was the other, there was a 4 this year that really were in need of.
So the powder house.
Powder house, central hose house, like, we went and visited the central hose house, that is a wooden foundation. We need to get somebody out there. I know that Dennis from the Historical Society, he and Jeremy have done some work, like they did some work in the bell tower, I can't remember what it was. Do you remember, Patty? Because they talked about that in one of the meetings.
No.
But Dennis actually does, like, he goes and checks on it every day. But I talked to Jeremy, who is our assistant fire chief, and he said they've got fire equipment in there, but they took away a lot of the leather stuff because it's not climate controlled. So it's drying out like their old leather buckets and stuff like that. So that may be something for us to look at. But I do know the central hose house is on the repair list this year with central hose house, powder house, visitor center. I feel like there was one more that was on our to-do, but it'll come to me.
Well, there's a few things that probably need maintenance, like the library doors and
Oh my God.
the cannon, which is painted.
But the paint's already, I mean, the paint did what it needed to do. So with the cannon, is there any kind of ground to the idea that that little grassy space that's right over here would come to us?
Oh, the Masons?
Yeah,
The Masons?
I'd heard that had been at least discussed in passing at some point, that we could maybe take it over and maintain it more as like a park space rather than just a green area, and maybe put a gazebo and things like
yes,
that.
because that would cover the canyon.
But I'm
Cannon.
not sure that any of that has.
We're here, like Mason?
Mhm. The rumor that we have heard is that they would be interested in letting the city take over maintenance and management of that and give it or donate it or something, some kind of agreement.
All they do is water it and mow it.
I don't know if they want to do that.
And
And if we could put a gazebo on there, cover the canyon, still point the canyon south and get it.
It'd actually be fairly dramatic, putting a cannon, it's so high above the street. It actually, there is sort of a drama to placing it in that type of location. To where it would probably spur some people to want to go up and see what's this about.
Well, also, it's not like we're killing a historical site because that cannon was brought here post-Civil War, you know, and occasionally pointed south. But this is not where the cannon lived firing at the south.
Right.
It was dragged here.
And there's not a whole lot of information about the canyon at that site currently, as far as I remember. Like a plaque or something.
Yeah, I don't think there
explaining
is
its
either.
historical significance. Kind of have to know it's historically significant,
That's where the
but
idea
we
of the
do have
plaque
a well
grants.
documented stories about it, John said, so.
So the things that the HPRC and the incoming sites and facilities, and I do anticipate, guys, that we will work with sites and facilities. If any of you would like to be on sites and facilities, that would be fantastic. I know there's some folks on the Historical Society. What do you give me that look for?
Because you kept looking at Mike and me.
No, I'm looking at all three of you, like, if you're interested in that, it's a slightly different focus, like this is, here's the historic district, and we're in, we're the entity that's supposed to make sure everybody follows, NPS, Department of Interior, and Idaho Springs guidelines. Sites and facilities is, here are the Idaho Springs assets, here's what we need to do. Let's see. Oh, the coach, that was the other thing. Well, no, the coach was the fourth thing. I have that listed.
Right, and then obviously, rehabilitation of the engine at some point as well.
There's a railroad museum in Nevada. They got an almost $1 million grant to fix up their engine.
Ooh,
I have to go, I've got the article about it, but I think it was from the National Trust that they got a $990,000 grant.
take care of all of our stuff. Well, the city council just approved $212,000 to, and you guys didn't get to see the coach, but you guys, I'm not a railroad person, I'm like, yeah, it's nice. But that coach is going to be gorgeous. It's already gorgeous. It's when they're done. Wouldn't you agree, Shannon?
And they put so much effort into maintaining the little details of fixing what can be saved and replacing what can't be saved with the right materials. It looks incredible. Even the little bathrooms in there.
It's up in Silver Plume, isn't it?
Yeah, the depot, yep.
And if you are interested, you can call them and say, hey, I'd love to see a coach. Like they said, they are like, they were just August 8th. They were just at the August 8th, April 8th meeting.
Yeah,
And-
because we were discussing the cover and potentially moving the engine and coach
Turning it
this
way.
kind of this side of the building to allow a cover to be built and also kind of get it further from the highway and have it be more visible from Minor Street.
And there used to be a wagon building just to the south of where the engine is. It shows up on a lot of historic photos of the Sanborn maps. But let's say this is probably about 40 feet south.
Was it the livery that we always hear Jeremy
there's-
talk?
there's a-
He
there's a
said
livery,
there's
yeah.
supposed to be a livery right here.
Yeah. And it's sort of a large shed type of, well, actually it has a gable roof, but it's obviously a commercial industrial building that was there.
Well, one of the things that we talked about, like with this, because this is a huge draw even now, but it's coach 60, no, it's coach 70 and engine 60. They're both historic to this area. That might help us in that grant because they are, it's not just one that we have managed to locate and get back here. It actually is they're from this area.
Yeah, that engine is one of 6 that the railroad donated to communities in the state. There's another one in Leadville, I forget what the other ones are.
But yeah, the guys up at the Loop Railroad are doing I don't know,
Would
you
you guys
guys,
send a picture in the chat? I'll pull it up on the
Yeah, put it up on
screen,
the
but
screen.
it's also in the chat.
And it's really good that just actually people locally who can do this.
that's
Because
what, go ahead.
Because when they redid the streetcar in Arvada, they sent that to Wyoming to be done. So it's a big plus that there's people with the skills locally to be able to do that.
That's the pine that had to age for 2 years. They bought the raw pine and then let it sit and age for 2 years for this. And they have just cut it, guys, it's truly stunning. Like that, we talked about that from the city standpoint can be a revenue maker. Like people could throw a small wedding party there. They could have a gathering or whatever, like they're gonna
Just
put the chairs
pictures.
in. Well, just pictures too. You could do photo shoots there, that, and we talked about, and I asked the railroad guys, because we're gonna turn the coach and this, turn everything this way. And it used to be that the railroad went across, went by the gypsum rows and then went over Riverside outward towards the Argo. And I said, so, we're doing all this construction over there. Could you guys lay tracks so that every 5 years, because the next thing is to restore the engine. Every 5 years, could we possibly run this sucker, run it to the Argo and come on back, and give people a chance to be on a historic car and engine. And the guys seem to think so. The guys in the train loop seem to think so.
I think that type of thing you want to do annually.
Well, it's
Not every 5 years.
I only say every 5 years because it's more from a maintenance standpoint. You have to, I think you
Oh,
have,
they're running it for new, okay, yeah.
yeah, you're running it so that it helps pay for itself and you don't wear stuff out, but they're redoing, what is it called? The car? No, the trucks for the coach. You guys, they look fantastic. They look brand new. Like, they're doing an amazing job.
Oh, one other thing, sort of along those lines, we had talked about possibly doing signs or plaques for the route of where the tracks went through town, sort of from one end to the other. Because that's the kind of thing where that's then an activity of people following the posts, and whether it's something about the railroad each point or whatever,
I forgot about it. That's an excellent.
but
idea.
that's, I think that's the type of thing, it's a participation type of thing, where you're sort of following the route.
Let's see, in here in my things to need to consider, all the assets, historical and non-historical, need to be evaluated along with maintenance needs for usage by the city's residents. And that does extend to our tourists and our visitors, but I really feel like our first line needs to be, what can we offer the residents? This is their taxpayer money that is being spent to own and maintain these.
And some of this probably also has a connection with either the school district or the library.
Which I think both of those entities would be willing to work with us.
Especially given that there's facilities at the library and at the
Yeah.
new Carlson.
So the new Carlson, the 103, that's the George Jackson, which apparently was the first state park in Colorado. Apparently the city owns the monument and then like 7,000 feet behind it. It's all in a disarray right now, but that needs to be something I think that we work with the school. Like, do we have a program at the school where they help maintain the monument, maintain access to it? Is it a volunteer thing for kids? Like, because that monument isn't going anywhere. So how do we work with the school as a partner? Then there's a whole bunch of other stuff. So I just wanted to go over that a little bit. Like, we really have some fantastic assets. And I think even though HPRC, our job is to maintain the historic district and these assets, as these assets need maintenance and repair, they're going to come to us. You know, in sites and facilities, I don't see any problem with sites and facilities going through and becoming commission, since we're just about at ordinance moment. We do. I don't see anything that's going to derail that. So we will be, I think, working with sites and facilities to help maintain these. One of the things we talked about too was that we have to put into, and this may be, I'm gonna switch gears a little bit. This is, Mike asked if we could talk about how we could do, like, update our design guidelines. Can we set up a program where we go through the design guidelines and update what needs to happen? To make them a little more appropriate for the 21st century and the things that we're seeing. But also, like with our assets, how do we, and this also goes for, I'm not sure what national park guidelines say for emergency stabilization, because one of the things that we noticed was that sometimes emergency stabilization needed to happen, but it wasn't done with a historic preservation eyeball.
Many years ago, the National Park Service had stabilization guidelines. And somewhere along the, I know this from an architect who used to work for the Park Service, but somewhere along the lines, they sort of got lost and they haven't done anything with those in a long time. But there are emergency stabilizations, and there's also techniques of, if you're talking about, okay, we need to basically keep this intact for a year while we figure out what we need to do long term. And like something that was mentioned here, or say like when I was in Telluride, one of the biggest stone buildings, which used to be a transfer company, is for 20 years, there's been a tarp over the top of the wall. There's no roof, but there's a tarp that goes all the way around, covering the wall all the way around. And it's actually made out of a special material. It's been there for more than 20 years, the tarp protecting that wall.
Wow, and so the wall is not damaged, it's actually doing its job?
Well, the main thing, yeah, the walls are fine. The problem with a thing like that is the water is gonna get into the mortar between the stone. And so the tarp protects the top of the wall from more erosion taking place. So there are emergency stabilization techniques like that. I might still have a list of some of those that when I was with Telluride for about 10 years, and I started collecting a list of those things that were regarded as emergency stabilization techniques.
I think those are important. I think they're important not only for the city assets, you know, like the train door got kicked in.
Mm-hmm.
And so our staff like had to go out and deal with it, but it was done with a, let me close it up,
you're kind of haphazardly drilling holes into it for screws just to get it shut and stabilize it.
Which had to be done, but I think we have to look at things more from, okay, how do we do this? And so that kind of brings me to, when we're looking at design guidelines, I think we have to go through, and I would like to talk with Dylan and you guys, like, maybe we each take a section, and hopefully by the end of the year, everybody can bring their sections together and we can all go through them. So by the end of 2024, we've gone through our design guidelines. Because they're not, I mean, they're long, but they're not onerous.
The other thing I would suggest along those lines is maybe the place to start with would be to look at the regulations and see, does this actually match what we're doing as to what's in the regulations? The actual historic preservation chapter is only 7 pages long. And then the section that deals with applications, which is in chapter 21, I think, that's a little longer, but not much. Well, no, it's actually not that long either. So it's not that many pages. And like I said, that might be just a good starting point as to, okay, this is what the city says we're doing. Is it what we're doing?
Well, I see as more people come in and people are buying our buildings, maybe they haven't lived here forever, you know, or they don't have the historic preservation mindset, like they need to understand what they're dealing with. They buy our buildings that are downtown or one of our historic buildings. But I also think it helps from the city standpoint if we have a clear guideline with the city assets, because city assets come to us too, of what needs to be done. Like, okay, here's how you here's how you stabilize an emergency, and then you need to come to us. So.
And that, are you thinking could be like a new section and like emergency sections in these guidelines?
Yeah, it could be. There could be several pages that deal with emergency stabilization. Because that comes up where you're, particularly with what's called demolition by neglect, where the property owner is just letting the building go. And sometimes the buildings reach that point. So it gets past that point, then it's the building inspector condemning something. So stabilization is sort of that last chance to. Right. So yeah, I would say like a separate section. And I think there's some other things to look at in terms of the guidelines. But to go back to the point you were making is that it also was worthwhile looking at what an applicant receives, because there are inconsistencies between the regulations, the guidelines, and the application materials. And so that would be a good thing to sort of reconcile.
Oh, I didn't realize that there was such a discrepancy.
They're not major ones, but they actually do, at 1 or 2 significant points, they do say different things.
Which muddies the water and makes this more difficult.
Yeah, but the original point I wanted to make though was that there's also a way of writing regulations to where it's not just a whole nother set of rules that just happen to be vaguer than normal than the building code. You could write regulations that sort of say, this is how you get approved. In other words, it's sort of a how-to approach to regulations. And also it's a matter of sort of looking at what is it we really want them to do so that they know that when they see the regulations. Because it's a good set of guidelines that we have, but it's like all guidelines. It doesn't have that sort of philosophy of, well, what am I supposed to do? And it's all written in sort of shoulds and maybes, as opposed to people actually want to know, what is it I have to do to get approved?
Right. It seemed like to me when we were dealing with the River Sound Opera House project that because some of the aspects are somewhat gray, like they were willing to make it fit within our guidelines, but until we had multiple work sessions with them to kind of explain what we were looking for, we didn't really have a great job of. I
don't know about you guys, I love that idea of, okay, here are our guidelines and here's what you need to do to get approved. Here's our goal, here's our focus, here's what you need to do to get approved. Like,
and
that takes some of the ambiguity out of it.
So they know that up front when they get the document. And sort of the interim thing has been using pre-application meetings, which the city attorney's not thrilled about it, but she's for some reason she's let this board continue having pre-application meetings.
Well, I do think we'll have an opportunity relatively soon to put together a lot better guidance. easily accessible because we are getting a new website very soon, and I'm thinking one thing that at least very point of contact sort of thing would be to create kind of like a how-to or kind of a process guide that has a lot of pictures and has a lot of like resources on it, so that while we have this document, you know, on the website, there's like a whole historic preservation section that, you know, gives people kind of that walkthrough.
Well, here's an
of all the
example
resources.
that I saw recently, is someone posted on the Facebook page for the city. I would like to replace my roof with metal. Can I do that? Am I allowed to do that? Well, are you in a historic district?
Right.
So something that someone like that could look up on the city website would be fantastic. That way they get the answer.
Yeah, like even as a starting point, you know, like slight revisions to these to clarify things and strengthen them and all of that is not an incredibly hard lift, but if we're fully rewriting these to kind of change the format and style, which maybe is important to do, is a much heavier lift. So at least having those FAQs sort of thing, policy document type how-to guide on the website and that we can disseminate to people is also a step in the right direction.
Because here's all it says about maintenance and repair. Maintenance and repair are generally not reviewed by the HPRC. However, if it's on the exterior of the building in a historic building, they still have to come to us for COA. So I see that's very vague.
Right.
People could get confused
However,
by
if the
that, for sure.
maintenance and repair activity changes the physical building appearance of a building or involves removal or replacement of significant materials, HPRC approval may be required. No, must be required, shall be required. Like that's, but that also doesn't give people like, wow, my wall is trying to fall down. What can I do?
Right, well,
Which is not a completely out of the realm of possibility.
when I was at the Saving Places conference, I chatted with some folks from Denver and then looked at all of their guidance documents and things on the website, and you know, they had a lot of good examples, you know, and not to say it's like perfect guidance documents, but they had a lot more examples, like for solar panels, for example, to show like graphically in pictures, like this is
That was
what
a
we're
good- that was a
looking
good
for, and this is not what we're looking for, which was helpful because if I moved to Denver, I'd know what I should consider for my solar panel designs.
And one of the other sources of information is that for, I don't know, at least 5 years now, the National Park Service has been updating their documents. For example, they've had what they call a technical brief, I think, on solar panels, and that was one that was updated about 2 or 3 years ago. And in terms of how they handle it, one of the major ones they did about 10 years ago was on doing additions to historic structures. And it has changed dramatically from what the one from 30 years ago said, because it basically talked about there are different ways of doing an addition to a building to where you're not compromising the historic structure. And the big thing they came up with, the big change they came up with is that you could build an addition to the side, which they always were against, if you make it look like a different building. So that it doesn't look like it's an extension of the historic structure. It literally from the street looks like it's a different building.
Is that still what they're,
Well, the idea is it would still have to be within the historic design criteria. But the idea is that you're not changing the appearance of the mass of the building
that makes sense.
by doing it that way.
There's a couple examples similar to that in Breckenridge downtown, like on some of their residences that I've seen that seem like that, where it's like, here's my historic home that has a plaque on it, and now there's this addition that's a fully different color and material, and it's triple the size of the house, but you wouldn't know it looking at it from certain angles.
Yeah, and there's actually quite a bit of literature available in terms of how to do additions, particularly to houses. One of the other things that also could easily be incorporated, for example, there is from the NAPC. Is the city a member of NAPC, or it would be good in next year's budget if it is, because it's only $35.
I was gonna say, is it a pricey membership? That's not a pricey membership.
But they do webinars all throughout the year. And if you're a member, they're free. In other words, I probably in a year, maybe you have 20 hours of webinars from NAPC that I see. Well, one of the webinars they did recently was on alternative materials, where they basically said, okay, how do you consider an alternative material on a historic
That's a
structure?
really good, that would be an excellent webinar.
But NAPC did a very good article in their quarterly magazine last year about, was an analysis of roofing materials, both in terms of appropriateness and basically how effective were these roofing materials. They basically, in the end, these are tables. And those tables could easily be put into the guidelines to sort of help make decisions about selecting a roofing material or selecting wall materials.
I think too, we have to look at solar panels, because I mean, you guys know, I'm gonna be hard pressed to say no to solar panels if they're not super out in your face, because I think renewable energy is the responsible thing to do. But also, not only roofing materials, what if somebody wants to go to another roof, but windows. You know I just replaced my ratty, janky 1930s windows, and it has dropped my heating bill. That is a legitimate concern. You know, like that goes into how do we not make things onerous? Like, I think we really have to have a discussion of windows and find a way that's not just buying the Anderson windows for $15,000. You know, for people, give people alternatives. That's what, one of the things that we talked about, and I think you had left by then, Mike, was that little brown house, or just a house in Idaho Springs that is a historic house, like within the period of significance. If the city bought it and then refurbished it, like every weekend, there's a class, and then the folks that are helping to refurbish it are doing videos, so they become part of our video library. And now we're also working with, you know, construction people that are familiar with the craziness of our historic buildings. And now there's a list of vetted because that's another thing, like who can work on your historic house and not screw it up? And then this house becomes like city housing or something. But something like that is an active project where we can document, you know, and that goes along with helping people. Because right now the house, like, I feel like, you guys tell me what you think, we're at about 100, in between 150 and 180 years for some of these, like, actually, we don't have anything 1860s left, do we? Maybe 170.
Like
Well,
in
the
city
reason-
limits.
Yeah.
Yeah, after the tents, the next village would have been log cabins. And the frame buildings probably are not until the 1880s.
1880, so we're at about 150 years. But I think once we hit that 150 year mark, now we're starting to get upwards with these buildings that, if some of them were like the Sears buildings, you know, or they were built with what can we find? Like, I don't know about you guys, but part of my house is built with Clear Creek rock, because that's what they had. People are gonna need ideas for how to upkeep these buildings in a way that does not cost the earth.
Well, in a similar vein, and this I've always noticed from having done work in Georgetown, is I always thought they could easily expand the appearance of the historic district if they just had a paint and insulation program.
Did you,
I told you, yeah, this is something from the Blackhawk Central City newspaper. They have a fund to assist property owners, and they have
Yeah,
classes too.
Yes, there's
So-
several cities that did, like, when I worked for Castle Rock 30 years ago, they had a program like that was fairly limited. But the idea is that possibly this is a grant or cheaper materials if you do it according to these guidelines.
well, and we talked about, like, apparently the city at some point, and I don't know, Jonathan would know the years, did facade improvements, like the city helped with facade improvements. Why can't we do that for our residents, not just our businesses? Why don't we, you know, expand that to residential facade improvements?
Well, the fact is, there's a lot of houses that are largely intact from more than 100 years ago. There haven't been additions, and just the paint job alone, a new paint job on those houses would make a big difference in terms of how they look.
And that's expensive. My little house, my little like 1,400 square foot house, we were talking about this before you came in, that house was over $11,000 to paint it, and that house is not a big house.
But I think, look, particularly with the small houses, a lot of it might be the homeowner doing the painting.
Oh no, this was me paying somebody.
No, but I mean, that type of program could be where the materials are available. As if you, in other words, it's sort of a And you're, as a homeowner, you're contributing the labor because you're getting the paint for free.
I would be totally, I would go totally down for that. So, one of the things that we also talked about, and I talked with Jonathan about this like at length, is when we are looking at sites and facilities and like the assets that the city owns, is that we really started to think, maybe we need somebody that this is their job, like that we need a sites and facilities coordinator who works with public works, who works with, you know, the building department permits, who works with code and, because I know we're talking about doing a building and code enforcement officer that we share with Georgetown. I don't know if that's gonna happen, but I hope it does. So they work with all of the facets of the city to do the things that the sites and facilities that the city owns to keep them maintained, repaired, you know, fixed, upgraded, whatever. Like, that did not start out, that was not where we started out. But somebody like that, which means it would also be somebody who works with Hprc, who works with sites and facilities, you know, that helps maintain the city assets.
And this would be a paid position, unlike the sites and facilities committee, it would be a paid position, I think you guys are talking about.
Yeah, no, this would be a city employee. And like the more we kept talking, the more we were like, wow, this is, because it's a lot of work. Like basically right now, the city staff is 5 or 6 people that work here in City Hall that are coordinating all this. That's not enough people. It's just not enough people. So that was kind of where we were going, and that would also help with updating our, like, spearheading and updating of this. So Dylan, do you have any suggestions on how we go about updating this if we wanted to do this within the 2024 timeframe in a way that doesn't require any one of us to take on a huge burden?
Well, you know, again, I think it depends on what the scope of the updates are. If it really is like, let's take this framework and revamp it, you know, change, you know, add structure to places and strength to places, then I think there's certainly a way to do it in-house. But I talked to John, if we wanted to really do a full overhaul of our guidelines, then maybe doing like getting someone to do an audit like they typically would with like we have a housing sort of code audit kind of going on right now with as part of the housing authority discussions and all of that. Opportunity grant, we can probably get grants of some kind to kind of have a historic preservation professional kind of do that work. Obviously that would slow the process down of making changes because we'd have an expert reviewing it for some period of time.
I would
So
like
we
this to
wanted
be
to
quicker
go
than
down.
the survey that went from 2020 to 2022.
Oh, the big,
Yeah, 2023. I think it was last year. We finally finished that.
But
Started in
so
like 2020.
as a similar kind of program, which is unrelated, but it's related because of going through a similar process right now. I noticed that we've not updated our 3-mile plan for annexation since 2008 officially, and it's supposed to be done close to annually per Colorado revised statute. So I'm taking like a brief staff report to council next week to just kind of request, hey, I want to work on this. And I think it's just a staff level effort, really. Like it wouldn't require professional work. It would just be spending time on doing it. And
I think the comprehensive plan is 2016.
2017, I think. So that one's pretty well due for an update as well. And we have it budgeted this year to at least start that process. We probably won't be able to have the whole kickoff this year, but at least getting things rolling on that is certainly possible. And I think kind of potentially doing 3-mile annexation plan and updating like this guidelines is a good way of potentially starting that kickoff of the comprehensive plan so that we've started working towards updating our long range documents and our guidance documents and that can roll into how we update the master plan as well. So maybe I don't know if we think that it's necessary to kind of get council input on updates to guidance and all of that before we get started in earnest.
I think it's a very good idea. I think it's always I
you
think it's
know,
always good that council knows what its boards are doing.
right, so I'm wondering.
That could go, don't we have a work session next week too?
We have a work session on the 22nd, which I would probably be ready for, but we have also one on the 29th and on May 13th. So I think, assuming we have time or in the work session scheduled for the 29th, maybe I could put together like a page to kind of talk about, like, this is what Hprc would like to do. We'd like to kind of just to update this with maybe just a minor update, 2024. We'd like to get started, and since
Would you be available for that, Mike? Because I don't think, even though I'm on, like, I don't think that I should be the one presenting that to city council.
and I'm
You can come to the
happy,
meeting, yes,
Yeah.
I could come to a meeting.
and I am
What's the date?
happy to, it would be probably April 29th, as long as we have.
No, I think I know, I'm not like saying that you don't do a good, I
Sure.
just think when we have representative board, I think it's really
Absolutely.
important for our board members to come and be able to talk to the council about what the board has been doing.
And a lot of this is actually part of is of the work I do. So in other words, there's a lot I would be able to
Absolutely,
assist with.
right,
In terms of knowing what other communities have done, having collected lots of other people's guidelines
yeah.
and knowing who has ones that work well. And Telluride, which is sort of, has taken a very strong stand on it. But their guidelines, even though they keep updating them, they don't really change anything. And they really were good guidelines 30 years ago. And they haven't really evolved, even though they keep rewriting them about every 5 years.
I think ours need to evolve. You guys tell me what you think. I think ours need to evolve, and actually we need to tighten ours a bit. That's my impression. I've been on Hprc now for almost 4 years. And where I find that we have the most, Mike and Patty have also been on here quite a bit, where we have the most contention is when they are vague and super gray. And it says should and may versus here's our guidelines that we want to see happen. You know?
And the planning field has become more comfortable over time when you deal with design issues to actually say, this could be a regulation instead of a guideline. And Cheyenne, Wyoming is a very good example. Their problem is they wrote 2 different chapters on their standards. They're both good chapters, but it's just funny that they came up with actually 2 competing chapters of what their standards were.
We kind of have that. If we have like, here's the application and the permitting and here's the guidelines. And they're not gelling.
So it sounds like what I would want to take to council is kind of a request to, well, you know, the need, I guess, to tighten the guidelines, evolve the guidelines, because things have changed in the city since 2007 when it was adopted. There's a lot more.
Well, these didn't do a lot of changing from 1996, 97, is that what it was?
I think they look similar to me.
Yeah.
Maybe a different way of phrasing it is that we would be looking at, are there gaps and inconsistencies?
Right. So
And that makes it sound like a more manageable project, as we're looking for things that we know are coming up on applications, but we don't have enough guidance in the document. So we'd like to fill the gaps in, look for the inconsistencies, and then how to make it easier for applicants, which is that whole idea of saying, this is how you get approval as opposed to, here's another set of rules.
But I think if this is something to mention to council, is that we like the idea, the commission likes the idea of setting it up so John Q applicant can say, okay, look, they've just told me what I need to do. Versus, like, it's basically what you're saying, like, this is not just rules, it's here's how you do it. Like, we're gonna, yeah, like a how-to versus a, here's the rules, you know, God be with you. But here's how you do it, and you know, it's also laid out so that city staff can walk people through with questions, like.
yeah, I think it's much easier if someone calls and says, hey, I want to subdivide by lots, or I want to, what, I guess that's a good example, because it's very clear to say, like, this is the criteria we're looking for, and if you meet these criteria, you know, you should be in good shape. Whereas with some of the guidelines, you're really saying, like, read this document and then prove to us that you
You understand it.
And one of the problems, from having looked at lots of guidelines for a lot of communities, is they're not really ever written to explain why are these guidelines saying what they're saying? In other words, there's no actual understanding of what's the purpose of this guideline. As to when you say, what's a historic building? Well, it goes back to how did it originally get approved? Why was it approved as a historic building? And what's missing in the guidelines is sort of that explanation of that. These are the important things we're trying to preserve
good
about the
idea.
building. These other things are not a big issue, but these are the important parts. And that explanation needs to be in the guidelines as to these are the priorities that we have.
Maybe a couple paragraph introduction, nothing
Yeah.
too long, but at
Yeah.
least enough to summarize that.
I think that's important because a lot of folks know that their historic building is special and that's part of why people are attracted to be there, but they don't realize why they've jumped through all the hoops. So,
Can I, so are you what is the suggestion that we have Dylan go through it, or Dylan, because you said you're gonna do the 3 mile annexation, you're doing that. Do you want to look through these and make recommendations, or do you?
And part is being realistic about what your schedule is too.
Yeah, like you
Well-
guys are like, it's not like you don't have a lot to do.
right, well, and the difference with the 3 mile plan and annexations and historic preservation is that I feel like our 3 mile plan and annexations is much more it's technical and it's code based and it's all of this. You don't necessarily have to be an annexation expert to be able to update that plan and kind of say, this is where we could grow, this is where our infrastructure exists to allow additional growth, which is kind of the purpose of the 3 mile plan very broadly. Whereas this is, a much more, in some ways, important document because it does guide how our precious resources changed over time. So I'm certainly not a historic preservation expert.
So maybe we need to find somebody.
And
Sounds like in that way.
potentially, and I mean, certainly, I think if, depending on how, when we dig into this, how much needs to be changed, it could be something that, this group certainly has the tools to update, depending on how much time we have to do it.
Okay, then with
what our
that,
capacity is.
can I ask, would you all be willing to at least read through the guidelines by June?
Yeah.
Like I'm giving you 2 months, and it's, I can tell you for me, I love Mike's suggestion about alternative roof ideas. What can we use for roofing? How can we offer people different thought processes on less expensive materials that still are historically accurate or acceptable? And my personal soapbox is windows. Like you cannot preserve some of these windows and still have a heat efficient building. Like people shouldn't be freezing or paying $600 in their electric bill. To like that to me is a like it's very discordant,
And one of the big issues, Windows has been one of the biggest fights in historic preservation
Yes.
for decades. And the reality is, at our elevation, wood doesn't last very long. Because the sun windows take a real beating, wood takes a real beating from the sun.
So maybe that's something that we have to look at. Who makes windows that will work at our altitude with our sun and our weather, and here's a price range. I don't think any of them are gonna be cheap, but
The company that has always had an interest in historic preservation is Marvin Windows. They actually sponsor quite a few conferences. They usually sponsor or they're major participants in conferences on historic preservation.
how pricey are Marvin windows?
They're in the top half, but they're not the top.
So like if Anderson sits up higher,
They're not as cheap as gelled wood, but they do cheaper than Anderson.
okay. I think that's something that we have to give people,
We
that's,
need to be aware of the realistic costs.
so windows for me is one of those things, but
Well, and one other thing I wanted to mention is I'm sure the state has already, like SHPO and this, the state resources are pretty good. And I've talked to a few folks from SHPO over the last month or so since the conference. Lindsay, who's the director, I think. Lindsay Llewellyn.
She's the CLG contact person.
Yeah, so.
She's the one who meets, she's the one who comes around and visits all the towns,
Right,
like every 3 years.
Mhm.
yeah, she's the CLG coordinator, but I'm guessing that they potentially have this at least assistance or guidance or suggestions on like where we could look if we did decide we kind of want to take it on internally versus pursuing grants or something to get it audited and have suggestions and all that, because I know like the housing audit, you know, took like 3 months or 6 months, you know, it can take a while, and this document is not as long as our code, certainly. So it might be easier to digest quickly, but
And another possible approach is to look at this as a two-stage thing. Is that we do it first, and then we'd have a better idea what we really want. We're gonna hire somebody, what we want them to do. I mean, I've had that occur with a lot of grants, is that once the grant project is done, you finally know what you should have asked for.
Okay, so then maybe us taking a look, just give it a read through, and you can open up if you have the ability, you can open up your PDF document. Cause we can download this in a PDF. Is it on,
yeah, it is on the website. I can send out a link.
could you send out a link?
But of course, we have paper copies if you want to.
Yeah, if you
mark
would,
up a
well,
paper
I
copy.
prefer PDF if you want a paper copy.
And I think I've converted it to a Word document as well.
So that you can make notes when we come in.
Yeah, because
you know.
I could also have a Word version. If you want me to send that, I could send a PDF and a Word version, and then you could make comments.
I'm either
whatever.
or, so whatever the easiest for everybody else.
Well, I'll send out both versions to everyone tomorrow. I certainly, if we said, let's do a work session, like I'll prepare for an April 29th or soon thereafter, whenever I can get us on the agenda for work session. Whether it's May 13th or April 29th. I'm just not sure how full. the
Well, if
meetings
both
are,
of those
but,
work for you, Mike,
I would need to check my calendar, but they should be okay.
if that doesn't work for Mike, are one of you ladies available?
For the 29th?
And I can coordinate as we, you know, I can check tomorrow and then send you.
And usually if it's an evening meeting, it shouldn't be I should be able to
Oh,
move
that's
anything
amazing.
because it would be an
Oh,
evening
races.
meeting. Unless they don't have their work sessions,
Work sessions would be start
5:30.
at 5:30.
yeah, that shouldn't be a problem. As far as either date goes.
And then, once we have that discussion, maybe we plan to have a work session here in June, whether there's a meeting or not, to kind of go over our initial findings.
Go over our
and
homework.
all of that, and, you know, that's liable to change, I suppose. but,
That will
you
also
know,
allow us to figure out, do we need to continue, like, to outsource this, or is this something we think we can do? Like, I like the idea that we do, why are we doing this? I also like the idea that we do we take the viewpoint that here's how you get approved. You know, and it's interesting though that you said that the city attorney is allowing those preliminary meetings, but they do have some very vague language in there for allowing for
Oh,
preliminary
that's
meetings.
part of the reason we do, is that when I was staff here, our consulting planner here, is they took that away from planning commission. The city attorney said, no, she doesn't want any pre-application meetings with applicants. But it never sort of was brought up about, well, the Historic Preservation Commission actually has it in their documents that says encourages pre-application meetings.
Right, I mean, historic preservation is a very hands-on and it's collaborative, I think, in a way that some planning things maybe
Are
aren't
not.
quite as much.
Having sat on planning, this is a different, like our collaborative meetings are different from what comes in front of planning.
And what we're doing is actually much closer to the building code than it is to a land use code. And that's, I think, has been a problem in many communities, is that they're attempting to write guidelines that are sort of being built off of a land use code. When in reality, what we're doing are things that really have to relate to a building
Building
code.
code. But I also feel like we, like, I would argue strenuously to keep our preliminary, I think our preliminaries allow us to fight out all the crap. You know,
Oh, yeah,
before we, like that COA that we just looked at tonight, that was very involved, but that solved a lot of our concerns with that particular project.
when I worked for Telluride, I started having pre-application meetings. And the main reason was if I wasn't able to convince an applicant, this will never get approved, you wanted the pre-application meeting so they could hear it from the committee.
Right.
That, no, this is no way it's going to meet the guidelines.
Yeah, and elsewhere I've worked has had like a work session process that you could do with council or planning commission, and it was like an extra fee or what have you, but it was kind of suggestions, no action, so folks kind of did, and it was normally at like 50% complete or something, like it wasn't, let's review this meeting and not deny it so that you can then change it. It was like, this is very conceptual, but let's talk about whether we approve a bed and breakfast at, your studio apartment in a neighborhood or something.
I think it does
So-
help though, and I think that this commission has really gotten good at saying, okay, yes, we would be down with that, and or no, we would not.
Well, it helps the applicant. I mean, who wants to just go in and get a rejection?
Right.
If somebody can help guide you into the things that you have to do, and so that you can do it correct, why wouldn't you have that meeting?
Mhm.
So that you can fix it and make it where it needs to be, so that when you go back for approval, it's gonna be approved.
Right, it makes
I
it
think
much,
that just helps them.
Right. It's
and
a
they
much
appreciate that.
friendlier approach, I think, as
Right.
well, because I've been in a lot of meetings where like I don't have a stake in it either way, but I'm like, white knuckle, like, is this gonna get approved? This is like really anxiety inducing.
This is a very, this area, historic preservation is an extremely contentious topic in a lot of communities.
I don't think we're contentious, although somebody told me recently that everybody hates HPRC, and my response was, that's because they don't wanna follow rules. Like,
Basically,
we're pretty easygoing,
and we try to help,
we do,
unless you're gonna break the rules.
in case we don't have them.
I'm ready to come out punching.
The fact that we would actually ask them about what your schedule is and your create deadline. Public boards don't do that. They usually don't care what a private party's deadline is.
Yeah, I see exactly what you're saying, but we are a community, we are a small community. You see, like, the people that we see here in front of us, I see out and about all the time. So, like, this is a neighborly community, it's a small community, I don't think we can be that way. I think we have to say, okay, what's your grant deadline, how can we work with you? So,
I think we also sort of work towards sort of goals, like we want to fill gaps, we want to look for things that are inconsistent. We also want to make it easier for the applicant to understand what they need to do.
well, and that's why I've started saying, when we meet with somebody, you do realize that you've bought a historic building, which means you didn't just buy a piece of property, you also bought an agreement between you and the city and the state and the feds, if you're federally, designated. And that's an agreement that by buying this property, you're agreeing to hold up. Like, if you don't wanna do that, like, you need to know that doesn't matter, because this has already happened, I want people to understand what they're getting into.
One thing I mentioned in terms of what we'd be looking at, there are literally several hundred documents that are readily available that cover almost any aspect of any topic you're interested in.
Right.
Between the National Park Service and NAPC, it literally is several hundred guidance documents that exist.
Are we a member of NAPC?
What's
I will
NPC
look
stand
at
for?
that.
National Alliance of Preservation Commissions.
I don't know whether we are or not, if it's only $35 or something to that effect, I'm sure.
And it could either be the staff person, I know that's I know the staff person is $35. I don't remember if the community membership is different than that.
Well, I would think if there's a significant number of like free webinars involved in that, then there must be an educational sort of conference budget that would fall in there, which would be helpful.
Yeah, because even if we could just get one login so that all of us could access it.
Yeah, that would be the thing to find out in terms of how, because like there's two this month still that are going to occur. And I forget what the topics are, and actually you had them on the list that you sent out to people.
Well, there's one tomorrow, I have it on my list right now, but it's about governance. Let's see if I can find it. There's a webinar tomorrow on commission member ethics and defensible decision making. And
Which is a good topic,
then there's
and that relates more to the regulations.
a May one about archaeology and historic preservation.
There's one, I think, on the 29th. Maybe it's on your list.
Not on this one that
Archaeology.
she sent out today, but,
No, that would be a good thing to be able to access, because I know when I read like the Department of Interior, like that's when I first started realizing what we have and what Department of Interior has, like there are some definite cracks that questions fall into, and it is completely a matter of interpretation.
And the interesting thing, and I don't know that most communities realize this, is the approach of the National Park Service is very different than the way most local communities
How so?
approach historic preservation. Their approach is very much built around the whole thing of relating back to how did you get on the National Register? It's all about the integrity and significance of the buildings. And so a lot of it's sort of oriented around what is it that gives the building, is the building significant? In most cases, you declare a district, okay, you already know it's significant. So that is what makes it, what is it that's important to the integrity, the historic integrity of the building. In other words, it is still something that if you look at it, you get a feel for this is what it was like 100 years ago, what this building looked like. And their orientation through that of the Secretary of Interior standards, my experience has been most places don't even look at those things. They have either somewhat written it into their regulations, but they really don't look at the aspects of integrity. They sort of have spread it out through their guidelines without saying, this is how you determine what's important. The Park Service actually has a methodology which is saying, if you have like these characteristics of the building like we have in the guidelines, how do you determine what's important? And that's within their documents. And the other thing is the Secretary of Interior standards, which almost no one ever uses them, but those are the actual, that is actually the original source material. The 10
Look at this all the time.
the 10 guidelines as to when and how do you use those 10 standards, what they call standards, they're really guidelines, but how do you apply those? And there's not a lot of understanding of what those guidelines, how you would apply them. For example, number 9 is the one that was always misunderstood, which was about compatible, but not, but still being compatible, both still remaining distinct. That one was misunderstood. And it took about 30 years for the Park Service to clarify what guideline number 9 meant.
I like the idea, though, this kind of goes along with what you said, I like the idea of understanding the integrity and how you got on the National Register, or how you got on the state register, or how you got on the local register. Like, I think that's an important aspect. One page of, here's our goal, in the very beginning that all applicants get. So is that enough guidance, Dylan, to get us moving? Because part of this has come about, like part of this I wanted to talk to you guys about after our tour. But the other part was that Mike asked, okay, how are we gonna get on the stick here and get to updating some of these guidelines? Is that enough to get us moving?
Yeah, this is definitely enough to kind of put together a brief memo, I guess, for a council staff meeting that kind of lays out, here's the reasons why we want to do it. Here's some initial like thoughts on what needs to be done. Here's potentially this 2-stage approach to doing it. And so what I can do is work on that this week, and then I can send that out to, of course, John and Andy and Carmen and all that, but I'll send it to this group as well.
Remember, only reply to Dylan, don't reply all.
So that way, if there's, I'm not explaining something fully, we can have that ready in advance so that it can be clearly presented to council. So I think that's great.
And then the 29th is our first reading for sites and facilities as well, for the next week. So if you guys have any feelings on that, you are welcome to come during public, like, second reading is when we do public comment.
Right. Okay, draft agenda for next. First reading is not here. It's the 29th will be first reading for sites and
So
facilities.
second reading would be like May 13th.
Well, I think, well, depending on public notice, I would guess that probably has to be the 0.7 for second read because of if they're posted. for
Just keep
10
those
days.
in mind, like if you have anything you would like to say. Anything you would like to add.
Right, and so once that's in the packet, I guess, once that's finalized, that first reading ordinance, I can send out that packet of information as well.
That would be good.
Yeah.
Um,
Because I think sites and facilities is going to be, and it's gonna be the same kind of commission as this, there will be a chair and at least 4 members. I know the Historical Society is interested in having some of their membership be on sites and facility. But other interested members, if you know of anyone, you know, like this commission is gonna need to get up and running, I think.
I have somebody that I've talked to about coming on to this one.
That'd be awesome, because I like, you know, I think in the last year, I think we've been really effective in how we have worked through what feels like some rather thorny COA requests. And I think a lot of it is because there's gray area and there's interpretation, so I think this is a good start too. And then in June, we should be able to decide, can we do this in-house? Or do we need to hire somebody? What do you guys think?
I think we can get a start on it so that we know what we want to improve. And I know one thing that I'm gonna look for is vagueness, because there are a lot of things that you're like, oh, is it this or is it that?
Or think about some of the applications we have in terms of was there something missing that would have helped us understand?
Right.
Like, for example, the wood siding changed on the hotel.
Yeah, sore subject.
DIMAD.
I mean, that was changed several times, or how many times the library changed?
Yeah.
Well, the library was that was just such a meandering mess. But we're gonna have to, honestly, guys, we're gonna have to look at the library again, because we looked at the doors and the sun and the water are damaging the doors. The water is also damaging those concrete railings. And then we're gonna have to do some work with the lights that sit at the bottom, or the concrete railings, like that whole east facing entrance into the library. Like, we need to come up with a plan of action of how that is maintained.
Have they completed all the work that was under their 10-year ago grant?
Yes, and see, that's also, like, they've done some work, it's not their building, and I say this as somebody that sits on the front of the library and talks to the library a lot. They've done some work that they didn't come and talk to us about, like the security cameras and things like, we need to, particularly with that building, we need to come up with a policy, like, here it is, here's how you do things, because it's not only a historic building, it's not only a Carnegie building, it's, you know, and it belongs to the city, not the library. So those 3 aspects, I think we have to be, like, that has to be its own specific, like, that way there's no ambiguity. And like things like the doors and those stairs and those railings, and like those are regularly maintained, like it's just on the schedule, we go look at it and see what we need to do. So the library is a whole nother kettle of fish. But I think
It's a can of worms.
you know, that it's not that it's a horrible can of worms, because I think we have a good relationship with the library. I think the leadership is, you know, very compatible and easy to work with, but I think standards and guardrails make everybody's life easier. And with that, because there's a lot of overlapping between who owns the building, who runs the building, who's leasing the building, who's responsible, you know what I mean? And it's a historic building and it's a Carnegie building. There's a lot that's going on with that particular building.
And part of the reason the artificial grass came about was who's responsible for maintaining the grass. So we wound up with artificial grass.
You truthfully, honestly, you guys, I don't hate the artificial grass.
It didn't look that bad. A friend of mine thought it was real grass.
There is some problems along the edging, like we saw that when we were over there. There are some problems, like the edging is melting or the edging gets getting frayed. Oh, well, you know the World War II
Grass is
monument?
melting.
No, that World War II monument, they had the glass there, and for some reason, like, the sun was hitting the glass and it came down and melted like a whole strip. Like there's this long skinny rectangle where it's kind of
Very noticeable.
like where's the spray paint? You know, so there are some issues with that are involved in the maintenance, but I don't hate it. I thought I was going to hate it. But the library, I think, is, you know, and that's something I think we work with Libby as, you know, the director of the library district, so that we come up with things that work for, you know, because I know one of the things that I was asked for the library is how do we do their lease, and then I'm gonna wrap it up, so get the heck out of here. How do we do their lease in a way that makes the library feel secure? Because Libby told me there's a couple of Carnegie libraries and libraries that I know of that are long established libraries where the building is owned by the city and the city booted them. And she's like, that's very unnerving to me. And so Jonathan said we have the longest lease we can, but I feel like we need to shore up that legal aspect so that they feel secure and comfortable and we have guardrails for how to maintain the building.
Why would you root the library out of a library building?
It happened in, the one she was talking about happened in Atlanta, I don't know.
Oh, well,
Atlanta, I know.
There's a similar situation that just happened recently in another city.
yeah,
And where it basically, because the historic board would not approve it, the mayor fired the entire historic board and appointed a new group of people. They're now suing the city,
Oh my
saying the
God.
people who replaced them were not qualified, did not meet the CLG requirements.
Okay, so if there's
Oh,
nothing
something.
else, then, what time do you have on your phone?
You do so.
I'm gonna call our work session, adjourned at 8:07. Thank you so much, you guys. Thank you for working on this.
Yeah, thank you for putting all that together about our tour. It was a nice
Yeah,
summary
It's
of it.
really well done.
Well, I was trying like, okay, let me go through everything and just talk about everything that we talked about.
yeah, I'm sorry, I got bogged down with this.